I worked mainly at night when I could play records loudly through two partly rebuilt 4x12 speaker cabinets, casualties of my destructive stage act. The other apartments in the building were still vacant, and the building on the other side of my studio wall was being developed as a new embassy building for the Lesotho High Commission. I felt entirely free to make music for the first time in my life.
The first machines that I started to use for composition were suggested to me by our manager Kit Lambert. This is when the group first started, in 1964. And he explained to me that on certain machines I could bounce from track to track, and each time I bounced, each time I made a copy, I could add things.
Kit often came to my flat to listen to the demos I was recording and became a real mentor in my songwriting. His system was always the same. He would smoke several senior service cigarettes and pace around, listening, blowing smoke in the air. If I'd written several songs, he'd listen to them all before making any comment and then pick his favourite. He was incisive and astutely never said anything I did was bad, or could be better, or would be better when it was finished. When he didn't like something, he found something about it to praise. It turned out that Kit was an expert at keeping the artist in me properly stroked. He was essentially kind, but I also took pleasure in the sense of his investment in me, expressed in a creative partnership. He treated me like a serious composer. If he laughed, it would always be a joke he knew I could share.
Pete's demos were always fantastic and were always a challenge, because it was very difficult. I mean, very often I'd listen to the song we were about to cut and I go, how the hell am I going to compete with that? Really, really brilliant demos, really brilliant. Obviously, he doesn't play drums like Keith Moon, and he doesn't play bass like John Entwistle. So, by the time the band got hold of anything, it became The Who. The basic arrangements and sound ideas and whatever else came from Pete's demos always, and the feel, pretty much. So it made my job particularly easy, really. I mean, I was much more of an engineer on their stuff than anything, really. I mean, my job was to record it as simply and easily and smooth the path as best I could, with the actual recording process as best I could.
You know, there's been no documentary about me making my demos because I don't think I could do it with a cameraman in the room. It feels so private, so personal, but it's also a huge enthusiasm. I had a world-class recording studio in my house, in my flat, when I was 16. I met a guy who was a TV guy, a guy called Barry Gray, and he showed me how to get these, machines from Abbey Road and from places like that, and how to bounce back from one machine to the other. So I was making great demos.
Not everything that has passed through my hands has ended up in here, but there's a fair amount of stuff. Because I've had studios at home since I was about 20, 21, and some of the odd things have actually lasted right through that whole time. This is quite interesting, this box here. I don't know how I manage without these now. Maybe we've got something slightly more sophisticated, but when I first built my studio at home, I found that I had incredible amounts of problems with, like, the washing machine clicking on and off, or the telephone ringing, or somebody switching on and off a light, or the bloke's minicab radio and stuff like that. And I rang round, and apparently what I required was a radio frequency interference filter. And you pass the mains through it, and it solved all those problems. Not something that you immediately think about when when you're setting up a little studio at home. You think, well, I'll just plug the gear in and away I'll go. But you've got to have one of these radio interference filter.
I was goofing off a bit there. I tend to do that on demos because I think on a demo you can push. You can be as pompous as you like, as stupid as you like, as aggressive as you like, or whatever. And then really what is then eatable on the day it comes out, you know, because it's a stamping ground, an experimental thing.
Actually, tell me exactly what these things are that we're going to be playing.
Well, really, I suppose they could have been anything, couldn't they? In the end, I decided it would probably be fairer to the group and to their fans to actually go back a couple of months to where I was a couple of months, which was with a few finished demos of my own. The stuff that I brought with me is actually my own demos, which I make for The Who, and I've done everything like that right all the way through the years. I've always made demos which I've played to the band, which I make at my own studio, which is much better than this bloody place, I tell you. Sorry about that. I mean, it's got a bar in the corner with hot and cold running jacuzzis, but basically they're different from the normal run-of-the-mill thing, because they're done. I do most of the parts myself, or all of the parts myself, on the ones that I bought today. And I've also bought songs which have already been rejected. Lad.
Well, super. Well, as we go through them, could you say whether they've been rejected or whether they're actually going to appear in some other form?
We recorded my first song, It Was You, in late 1963 at the home studio of Barry Gray, who wrote music for children's TV puppet series like Thunderbirds and Fireball XL5. Dick James, the Beatles co-publisher at the time, heard It Was You and signed me to his company. I was a guy who thought love would pass him by. Then I met you, and now I realise it was you who set my heart a-beating. I never knew love would come with our meeting. The song was recorded by the Naturals, a Mersey beat style band actually from Essex, and a couple of other groups. It wasn't a hit, but the fact that it was published at all gave me tremendous confidence. I felt I now had a right to speak up about the band's musical direction and even get bossy about it. Roger was definitely in charge, but there was a new tension between us. We were both really keen to make it and had our own ideas about how to do it. Still, we developed a grudging respect for one another that would last a lifetime. On top of our daily work schedule, we were doing gigs every couple of days, sometimes several in a row. Our audience was mainly mods. Before I began playing the guitar the way I was always meant to play it. The sound I'd favoured until then, borrowed liberally from American prodigy Steve Cropper's guitar solo on Green Onions. A cold, deeply menacing sexual riff. This, I suppose, is how I imagined myself at 18. Now, at the flick of a switch, the central pickup I had set close enough to the strings to almost touch them on my modified Rickenbacker 345S guitar. Cut in to boost the signal 100%. The guitar, with a semi-acoustic body I had tuned by damping the sound holes with newspaper, began to resonate. After gigs, I found it harder and harder to get up the next morning for class, and at some point before the summer break of 1964, I stopped going to college at all. My musical self-certainty drove me blindly forward. I felt I was hauling a band behind me that was ill-suited to the ideas drummed into me at college, but it was a better vehicle than the conventional life of a graphic designer. I wasn't trying to play beautiful music. I was confronting my audience with the awful, visceral sound of what we all knew was the single absolute of our frail existence. One day an aeroplane would carry the bomb that would destroy us all in a flash. It could happen at any time. The Cuban crisis, less than 2 years before, had proved that. On stage, I stood on the tips of my toes, arms outstretched, swooping like an airplane. As I raised the stuttering guitar above my head, I felt I was holding up the bloodied standard of endless centuries of mindless war. Explosions, trenches, bodies. the eerie screaming of the wind. I'd made my choice for now. It would be music. The time had also come when we realised we had to work full-time as musicians, or we would be unable to compete with the likes of the Stones, the Beatles and the Kings. Moonlighting was no longer enough. It had become essential, too, that we get our sound right. I sought the wisdom of Jim Marshall, who would become the inventor of the Marshall Stack, the high-powered amplifier systems used by most heavy rock guitarists since the mid-60s. Jim ran his music shop in West Ealing. John Entwistle, one of Marshall's first customers, was very happy with his new cabinet of 4 12-inch speakers intended for bass guitar. I was less thrilled. John, already very loud, was now too loud. I bought a speaker cabinet and powered it with a Fender Bassman head. John bought a second speaker cabinet to stay ahead of me, and I quickly caught up with 2 Fender amplifiers, the Bassman and my Pro-Amp, driving 2 Marshall 4x12 speaker cabinets. John and I were in a musical arms race. I was the first electric guitar player on our circuit to use 2 amplifiers at the same time, and I only heard much later that my then hero, Steve Cropper of Booker T and the MGs, sometimes recorded with 2 amplifiers. Back to back. The distortion factors introduced by each amplifier became much more complex and rich when fed back reciprocally. I'd also begun to pile one Marshall speaker on top of the other to emulate the conditions at Oldfield Hotel, where I'd first put a speaker on a piano in very close proximity to where I stood playing the guitar, creating feedback. This configuration is what later became known as the Marshall Stack. I remember Jim trying to talk me out of it at first, telling me they would topple over and kill someone. The first cabinets I had were clipped together with heavy luggage clips he provided. Over a period of months, I persuaded Jim and his team to make his amplifier not just louder, but also brighter sounding and capable of more distortion when pressed hard. In rock and roll, the electric guitar was becoming the primary melodic instrument, performing the role of the saxophone in jazz and dance music and the violin in klezmer. I began using feedback more creatively. Sometimes my guitar solo would simply be a long, grinding howl full of evolving harmonics and whistles. But in its enormity, I discovered something euphoric, a sound full of movement and cascading melody. This is something that later exponents of electric guitar feedback explored far better, especially Jimi Hendrix. Oddly, I felt some shame too during these droning moments, but not for any self-indulgent act of musical desecration. In truth, I had no idea what the origin could be of all the contradictory emotions I felt when creating these warlike sounds. Something was bubbling up from my subconscious mind. I was experimenting all the time, trying to find new ways to play my guitar on stage, inspired directly by Malcolm Cecil. He had demonstrated unusual ways of playing his double bass, in one case breaking a string, then being challenged by being given a wood saw which he bravely used to cut through the rest of the strings, damaging the surface of his instrument. I fell upon my Rickenbacker with all manner of scraping, banging, bending and wrenching, which resulted in howling acoustic feedback. Encouraged too by Gustav Metzger's work, he was the father of autodestructive art, I secretly planned to completely destroy my guitar if the moment seemed right. But I also copied neat solos by Kenny Burrell, the jazz guitarist. Had I studied properly and practiced more conventionally in these years, I would have become a more proficient guitar player and less of a showman. It became clear that with Keith Moon in the band and a new record deal, we had a real chance at a career in music. I'd already written a couple of decent songs, and was using an old tape recorder to write new ones in the style of Bob Dylan. Musically, I felt I was already on course. Barney and Jan had both constantly urged me to develop my sound and guitar solos, and to utilise all the wildest, most pretentious ideas from our old Ealing Art School lectures. John Entwistle, always uneasy with being merely a bass player, began to open up his sound as well. He already played louder than most other bass players, but now he began to play with more harmonics. When he later discovered wire-wound bass strings, his sound evolved into the one we recognise today. But even at this time, his playing was expressive and creative, almost a second lead instrument. As I developed my sound, so did John, and it's now much clearer to the world what he did to advance the craft of electric bass guitar playing, especially in his development of special strings. We each occupied a specific part of the sonic spectrum, and although we occasionally attempted to dominate each other, the end result was that John's sound perfectly complemented my own. Against John's loquacious bass lines and Keith's liquid drumming, I fell back further into using powerful slab chords. My solos were often simply howling feedback or stabbing noises, but never quite loud enough to suit me. One day, in 1964, Jim Marshall delivered me an amplifier system I was reasonably happy with. A 45-watt amp that had a crisp American sound, but when you turned it up, it screamed like a Spitfire, that essential British war machine, sleek, simple, undefeatable. I bought two and used one to drive each of my speaker stacks of 8 12-inch speakers. Now, not only was my sound unique, it was so loud it shook most of the small halls in which we performed. Jim had no idea his amplifier design would make him rich, and I had no idea it would make me strong. What was I looking for in this drive to create a successful band? I was only 18. I was motivated by artistic visions as well as the usual pop star dreams of money, fame, big car, gorgeous girlfriend. Literature or poetry or Picasso's Guernica. Music too. All good art cannot help but confront denial on its way to the truth. With The Who, I felt I had a chance to make music that would become a part of people's lives. Even more than the way we dressed, our music would give voice to what we all needed to express. As a group, as a gang, as a fellowship, as a secret society, as subversives. I saw pop artists as mirrors of their audience, developing ways to reflect and speak truth without fear. Still, I was more certain then of the medium than the message. Surely, God help us all, we weren't just going to write songs about falling in love or hopeless longing. What was it then that needed to be said? I'd found a new sound, now I needed the words. One evening I decided to conduct an experiment, and instead of my usual ritual of listening to music stoned, I began to listen to one of my choicest records while drinking good Scotch whiskey. As I listened and drank, I wrote down what was going on in my head. I began to feel afraid. Childhood self-pity arises. Music is inside me. I'm not afraid to let it in. Finding new perceptive levels. I'm underwater, not going too deep. Going to write with eyes closed. swimming with the fish, unexplainable emotion, death. My demons were still with me, but I was learning how to use them to fuel my creative process. We played I Can't Explain over and over. The crowd went berserk. Afterwards, a delegation asked if they could come backstage and speak to me. Led by a gangly Irish boy called Jack Lyons, they paraded in and told me they really liked the song. I thanked them, asking them what they particularly liked about it. Jack stuttered that he really couldn't explain. I tried to help. The song's about being unable to find the words. "That's it!" Jack shouted, and the others all nodded. Without my art school training, I doubt that this moment would have touched me the way it did, but it changed my life. I'd been set up at college, especially in my last days doing graphics, to look for a patron, to obtain a brief, to find someone to pay for my artistic excesses and experiments. My new patrons stood before me. Their brief was simple. We need you to explain that we can't explain. We need you to say what we are unable to say. It would be wrong to say that I floated home on a cloud that night, but I felt vindicated. I was still hooked on sudden fame and notoriety, being on the TV, the radio, having written a hit song. But now, I knew The Who had a greater mission than just being rich and famous. And pretentious as it might still seem even today, I knew with absolute certainty that after all, what we were doing was going to be art. Devoted one of the rooms to a recording studio. This was one of the busiest periods of my life, when I felt isolated among the diplomats, the aristocrats of Belgravia. That loneliness became the engine of my creative drive. The essence of the song My Generation had probably been contained in the first abandoned lyric for I Can't Explain, which only Barney ever heard. That first version was a kind of talking blues. The title came from Generations, the collected plays of David Mercer, a dramatist who'd impressed me at Ealing. Mercer was a socialist, like Arnold Wesker, verging on Marxist, and his rallying on behalf of his plays' working-class anti-heroes later offered me a way to connect with the West London fans of the band. At that time, Kit Lambert had loaned me a record that changed my life as a composer. It's what I'd played during my Scotch-fueled listening experiment, a Czech recording called Masters of the Baroque, including the principal movements of Purcell's Gordian Knot Untied, a Baroque chamber suite, the most powerful part of which was the chaconne. The performance is passionate, tragic, and deeply moving. I was struck by Purcell's unique, luxurious use of suspensions, a staple part of Baroque decoration at the harpsichord, but in Purcell's hands, the suspensions were elongated into heart-rending, tortuous musical modes, especially in the minor keys. I began to experiment, and the first time I used suspensions successfully, in The Kids Are Alright, I don't mind. It was mostly to suggest a Baroque mood. Belgravia, a rich neighbourhood where women in fur coats shoved me out of line as if I didn't exist, only made more starkly apparent the generational divide I was trying to describe. I worked on My Generation all through the summer of 1965, while touring in Holland and Scandinavia. We caused a street riot. I produced several sets of lyrics and 3 very different demos. The feeling that began to settle in me was not so much resentment towards those establishment types all around my flat in Belgravia, but fear that their disease might be contagious. Home from Sweden, we recorded the final version of My Generation. Kit had heard my first demo, a version that was very much inspired by Mose Allison's Young Man Blues, a song we later introduced into our stage repertoire. The vocal on my demo was laid back in imitation of Mose, casual and confident. Kit hadn't really seen the promise in the song, but Chris persuaded me to try a second demo with a heavier guitar riff. Then Kit chimed in, observing that the music was rather repetitive and needed several modulations, changes of key, to bring it to life. This worried me a little, partly because I saw Ray Davies as a master of the art of modulation, and I didn't really want to be accused of copying him. Chris picked up on a stutter on my vocal on the second demo, so I played him John Lee Hooker's Stuttering Blues. Roger had been experimenting with stuttering on stage ever since Sonny Boy Williamson Jr. had joined us on harmonica at our first marquee dates. Sonny Boy used to stutter rhythmically when he sang. Before I completed the third demo, we experimented until the stutter became exaggerated and obvious.
Talking about my generation.
This final demo, we also created space for an end-whistle bass solo. John was becoming the standout bass revolutionary of the day, and I wanted to provide him with a vehicle for his incredible playing. And all that TV exposure, the Who were in high demand. I remember Kit bringing Mick Jagger to Cheshire Place and playing him Magic Bus, which I was working on at the time. Substitute began as a homage to Smokey Robinson by way of the Rolling Stones' 19th Nervous Breakdown. I set up my 2 tape machines, now stereo, in my new flat and wrote. I heard in my own voice the tumult of a young man playing a role, uneasily repackaging black R&B music from America, relying on gimmicky outfits and pretending to be wild and free when in reality he needed to be looked after by his mother. Knowing I could write songs, they encouraged me to come up with some new material that might suit the band. This was the most critical challenge I had ever faced. I isolated myself in the kitchen of the flat in Ealing where I kept my tape machine, listening to a few records over and over again. Bob Dylan's Freewheeling, Charlie Mingus's Better Get It In Your Soul from Mingus. I love Mingus. I was obsessed with Charlie Parker and bebop. John Lee Hooker's Devil's Jump, and Green Onions, although my record was nearly worn out. I tried to divine what it was I was actually feeling as a result of this musical immersion. One notion kept coming into my head: I can't explain. This would be the title of my second song, and I was already doing something I would often do in the future, writing songs about music. Got a feeling inside I can't explain, a certain kind I can't explain. Feel hot and cold, can't explain. Down in my soul, can't explain. At the time I was still using a clunky old domestic tape recorder to record my songs, which I used to put down a simple demo. Barney listened to it when he got home from college and he liked it. I remember him describing it as Bob Dylan with a hint of Mose Allison. Kit and Chris, through a friend of their glamorous personal assistant, Anya Butler, met with the producer of the Kinks' recent chart hits, Shel Talmy, who had his own label deal with Decca in the USA. He agreed to hear us. I ran back to my tape machine and listened to the Kinks' You Really Got Me. Not that I really needed to, it was on the radio all the time. I tightened up I Can't Explain and changed the lyrics so they were about love, not music. I tried to make it sound as much like the Kinks as I could so that Shell would like it. I already had the title for the song that would follow it, Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, words I'd scribbled on a piece of paper while listening to Charlie Parker. We played Shell Tell Me, the revised I Can't Explain, and he booked us a session at Pi Studios to record it. Shell brought in some additional musicians, which Kit had warned me he might do. Keith jovially told the session drummer, who appeared, to scabber, and he did. Because Shell wasn't sure I could play a solo, he'd asked his favourite session guitar player, Jimmy Page, to sit in. And because our band had rehearsed the song with backing vocals in Beach Boys style, but not very skillfully, Shell had arranged for 3 male session singers, the Ivy League, to chirp away in our place. Shell Tell Me got a good sound, tight and commercial, and although there was no guitar feedback, I was willing to compromise to get a hit. We wouldn't know if the gamble would pay off until the new year. Substitute was the Who's first single not to be produced by Shell Tell Me, and I was elected to produce it. Kit and Chris used Stigwood's Reaction label to release it on March the 4th. The record charted quickly. Shell responded by bringing legal action against Stigwood's distributor Polydor and provided a legal affidavit claiming that he deserved the lion's share of the royalties because he had contributed significant musical guidance. I had worked from my own demo, as had Shell, and in my own affidavit claimed that if the court compared my demos with Shell's, they would see that all the creative work had been done by me before Shell even heard the songs. On one of the Who's many trips away, I began imagining that my fabulous new girlfriend Karen was deceiving me. It was this kind of paranoid, unhinged thinking that spurred me to write I Can See for Miles, one of my best songs from this period. The first lyric was scribbled on the back of my affidavit in the case between Tell Me and Polydor. Perhaps that's why the song, about the viciously jealous intuitions of a cuckolded partner, adopts the tone of a legal inquisition. The studio was big enough so I could play the drums, and I learned how to play keyboards on a clunky Hohner Cymbalette electric piano I bought from Jim Marshall. I tried hard to write orchestral pieces and recorded an instrumental I called M. Based on a 12-string guitar part that I made up as I went along, it ran for 7 minutes with rising and falling dynamics reinforced with basic drum overdubs and additional guitar. I was immensely proud of this recording, which stands as one of the finest expressions of my freeform ability as a guitar composer.
One girl was called Jean Marie.
In August, we recorded I'm a Boy and Disguises, with Kit finally in the producer's chair. Our new record deal was with Track Records, founded by Kit and Chris, with the promise that we would own shares as well as receive royalties. Kit was a joy to work with. He made recording fun and seemed to be recording a more musical sound, although Roger and I still felt tied to the bluff, tough sound we developed in the Who live gigs. Meanwhile, I was becoming obsessed with a bigger idea. Could I write a real opera?
Happy Jack wasn't old, but he was a man.
After a summer of professional lunacy that included the Who's first appearance in the beloved Palace Ballroom of my childhood in the Isle of Man, I completed and assembled demos for a number of tracks intended for the Who's still untitled second album. I bought a cello and played it on Happy Jack, a nonsense song I wrote about a village idiot from the Isle of Man. This is Paul McCartney's favourite Who song, tellingly because it was partly inspired by Eleanor Rigby, which I thought was a small masterpiece. Happy Jack wasn't old, but he was a man. He lived in the sand at the Isle of Man. The kids all would sing, he would take the wrong key, so they rode on his head on their furry donkey. But they never stopped Jack, nor the waters lapping, and they couldn't distract him from the seagulls flapping. These are the original words, slightly altered on the Who's version. The atmosphere of the lyric is meant to be Kafkaesque. Who was contingent on John, Keith and Roger contributing at least 2 original songs each to the album. I went along with the scheme, since my songwriter earnings on the Who's hits had protected me thus far, and I was happy to help. I explained my working methods of making demos to John Entwistle, who bought himself a kit like mine and wrote and recorded his first song, Whiskey Man, in the tiny bedroom at his parents' house in Acton that he still used as a bass. I was the first person in the band he played it to. A week later, John added Boris the Spider to his list. I loved both songs. I helped Roger demo See My Way in my Soho studio, a Buddy Holly style piece. It was easy to work with, but this time out, Roger didn't get any further than that one song, although he later wrote one more for The Who and went on to write quite a few in his solo career. Keith got John to help him scrape together a lyric for Keith's song, I Need You, inspired by seeing the Beatles at the Ad Lib Club in London, and I recorded the demo with him in Soho. It was a nightmare trying to work out the melody as Keith's singing was so tuneless. His second song, a rip-off from a film score banging around in his head, he merely whistled at us. We all knew we'd heard it somewhere before, but couldn't place it at the time. It turned out to be Eastern Journey by Tony Crombie. This became Cobwebs and Strange, a bizarre marching band tune that was great fun to record because we actually marched around the studio while it was taped. John played trumpet, I played banjo, Keith the big bass drum, and Roger the trombone quite brilliantly, I thought. We overlaid the band over the marching track. I added penny whistles, and with Keith's cymbals, it ended up sounding like the accompaniment for a circus act. I'd been discouraged from submitting any additional material to The Who's second album in order not to upset the necessary balance for the new Action publishing deal, so none of our recent hit singles appeared on the album. In a mad rush to fill the gaps left by this default, we added Heatwave, a Tamla song we always played on stage, but there was still a 10-minute hole. Kit came to see me at my Soho studio and I played him a few works in progress, songs about rabbits, fat people, and Gratis Amatis, the opera dedicated to Kit and our beloved mutual friend, the composer Lionel Bart. Kit asked whether I could put together a more serious pop opera piece with several distinct strands, perhaps based around Happy Jack. If I could, this would fill the entire hole in one fell swoop, and the record could be released quickly. Quick, quick, quick. A quick one became our new watchword and the title of the new album when it was finally released. I scribbled out some words and came up with a quick one while he's away. This became known as the mini.
Our man's been gone for nearly a year. He was due home yesterday, but he ain't here. Her man's been gone for nigh on a year. He was due home yesterday, but he ain't here. remedy. We have. Little girl, why don't you stop your crying? I'm gonna make you feel all right. My name is Ivor. I'm an engine driver. I know him well. I know why you feel blue. Just 'cause he's late don't mean he'll never get through. He told me he loved you in the right. So let's have a smile for an old engine driver. Let's have a smile for an old engine driver. Train noises. Please take a suite. Come take a walk with me. We'll sort it out. Back up the place may be.